And welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is Mr. John Cameron.
Hello.
Hey, John, how you doing this week?
Doing pretty well.
It's been a good week. Been a good week. You know what hasn't been? A couple weeks ago, Jon Stewart did a interview with. Oh man, I am blanking on the guy's name.
Yeah, New York Times reporter. Wasn't
It's something like that, and they were discussing how. The bureaucracy for the broadband, the rural broadband, and the steps that states had to go through, and why out of 56 applications, only 3 have made it to the stage where they can actually now ask for money.
Is it stage where they can ask for money, or where they can ask for grant money to ask for money?
No. They got the grant money to ask for money. They got that. That was like stage 5. And so Jon Stewart was, and this is a perfect. I didn't have time to make a video. I was going to cut together the video clip, but I just didn't have time last night. But that's Jon Stewart, and that is at stage 4 or 5 of the convoluted process.
He was dropping F-bombs and just walked off near the. He didn't even get to the end. He just walked off.
No, he stopped at like stage 14 out of 15 steps or something, and each one of these steps themselves have 6 or 7 steps within the steps, and we wonder why our bureaucracy is just so convoluted. We wonder how we can fire 14,000 people, and most of us are going, nothing's going to really happen. As long as you can fire the right 14,000, as long as you fire the people who are
I don't even think it actually matters
doing this kind of goofy stuff.
Fire the right 14,000. I have a theory that you could put all federal, state, county, city workers in one of those things that they have, they used to pick numbers out of for lotteries, and just pull out and you wouldn't notice a difference. What's crazy is that the Dems set this up. They got the money 4 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, it was 3 years ago. It was Biden's first year.
So it's 3 years later, and only 3 out of 56. Many of them have washed out completely and just washed their hands of it and said, we're not even going to do it.
Forget it. It's not worth it.
Do it. All they need to do is ask real nice, and Elon Musk will turn on Starlink for them, so they won't even need it.
Well, a lot of these places are now reached by 5G. You don't need broadband.
Not my house, though.
You don't get 5G at your house?
I got 1 bar at my house. It's 5G, but I got 1 bar. Yeah. Now across the river, directly across, 1 street over, they got 5G. And
you found a dead
quarter
zone.
of a mile to the south, they got 5G. Half a mile to the west, they got solid 5G. And but not where I am. It's a dead spot.
And that's the thing. If the government wants to pay to get rural areas, why don't they just say invest in the companies, Verizon, T-Mobile, all the big cell phone companies, and have them put the 6G towers there first?
Yeah.
You subsidize the 6G towers, so then the rural areas can actually have real modern internet, rather than old cables.
Well, that's because cable's way more expensive, and they get to give the money once it's there. Well, first of all, I'm sure that the consultants that you had to hire to put in the request were of the favored class, and within a certain group of people. There was only a few that would do it. Now, the people that are going to do the actual installations will, of course, have to be paid, what do they call it? Not living wage, labor union rates. Prevailing wage. They will be from companies that don't know what they're doing, but have been very good at giving political donations to the Democratic Party. And it's going to be a nightmare. My guess is that even those 3 that asked for the money, it's going to take them another year to get it. It will take 5 years for it to be in place, something like that.
And this is deliberate. This is in the law. This isn't what the bureaucracy came up with. This is what the politicians came up with.
It's deliberate for a reason. People think that graft and corruption can be eliminated, that it's a byproduct of government. But the way our government is set up, it's actually the goal of government, is to create areas where they can put in tremendous bureaucracies and hire a whole bunch of cronies that will wash money to give back to them. And lots of opportunity for corruption, so money gets back to them. That's the goal. The byproduct is occasionally they'll fix a road or educate a child, heaven forbid, or something like that. That's the goal. People need to realize it.
Well, they were giving out $5 million planning grants.
Planning grants,
just to issue your plans, and then the convoluted thing to get your plan approved. only 3 people have made it to the point where they are qualified to now start asking for the actual grant. And this is 3 years later.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's just, we can throw out more, 8,000, no, 12,000? Over 10,000, I think, home structures burned in the fire up by Oroville in the Chico area. 3,000 houses have been built, and that was 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's the speed of the bureaucracy moves and is glacial.
Yeah.
And it's deliberate.
Intentionally.
And it's intentionally glacial. It's intentionally glacial. Now, we talk about bureaucracy and speed of bureaucracies. There is no bigger bureaucracy over than China. And, you know, China is a deliberate, huge bureaucracy. But the problem with China is they are so opaque that you'd have no idea what's going on. So, John, I can't pronounce these people's names.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to make Weidong and Xi Jinping. Xi's the chief guy, the chief crook, the chief Chinese Gestapo head of, you know, everything. He, Mr. Weidong, I think, was a high-ranking military person who was an ally of Xi. As he was moving up, he handpicked him to move in and be in charge of the political part of the military. They have political officers in the military. We have them, but we just don't give them that title here. You know, maybe DEI and stuff like that. And so really the only way you can find out if anybody's out of favor or in favor is if they get reassigned somewhere, or if they're brought up on charges of corruption, or if they just disappear. They don't have to be disappeared as the people in South America do, or Clinton Hillary's former lovers. But did I say that? I probably shouldn't say that. Huh? Anyway, so you really, there's a, I don't know if I should give them a plug, because they're hardcore pro-Trump, anti-Chinese party. Epoch Times, I think. Yeah, they have a bunch of Chinese people, because they came from China, many of them, Falun Gong folks, and so they watch all this stuff like a hawk, and I sort of depend on them to tell me what's going on in China, because there's no way you know. But what will happen is one day, if Xi is losing his stranglehold, is one day there'll be a Congress and he'll step down, or be forced to step down, and they'll find out that he did a bunch of corruption. And then there'll be some new people in power doing the same thing over again. So it looks like there's something going on. Either he's consolidating power, or he's blaming these people for the lack of good stuff going on in China, because their economy's tanking and there's huge high unemployment, and they're getting ready to hit this rough patch because of stupid tariffs. And so then the third thing is that he's on the way out. So we won't know until it happens, unfortunately. There'll be mutterings, but our State Department is so bad, they actually call it the blob. Nobody can control it. It's just like this thing from Star Trek, you know, that just like this blob that you can't kill it.
Like the old horror movie, The Blob.
If you chop off part of it, I don't think I watched The Blob, I'll have to watch it. If you chop off part of it, somehow a little while later it reconnects and it gets stronger the more you mess with it, and that's kind of like China. So we won't really know, but something's going on. But we're not quite sure what. So the question is, that's why there's a question mark there.
Yeah, is what the behind the scenes power moves.
Yeah.
And this is a symbol of that. Or he got sick, like people in his age can do, and he's sitting there dealing with cancer, and he just don't want to say anything.
Well, the thing is that the article, was that in Epic?
Yeah, it started. Yeah, but
yeah.
It's the
you
same
can find the same stuff elsewhere. But the reason we think something's going on is that a lot of other people that Xi brought in as his favorites have been moved to lesser positions. So something's going on.
Yeah,
either he's throwing them under the bus, or something. But anyway, we'll find out soon. Hopefully not because of mushroom clouds. We'll find out.
But you know what we're going to find out right now, John?
What?
We're going to find out what Mr. Richard Fields has to say about tariffs.
I think I know sort of how he's going to lean on this, but I'm interested to hear the pros.
All right, let's see what Richard Fields has to say about tariffs this week.
Cool.
With this week's report from the fields, the folly of voting for the lesser of two evils is playing out in orange technicolor right before our eyes. MAGA voters voted for the orange man because he wasn't Kamala Harris. Fair enough, she arguably could have, in different ways, been even worse. But Trump had the gall to call April 2nd, the day most of his mindless tariffs went into place, Liberation Day. His own quack economic advisor, Peter Navarro, claims the tariffs will raise $600 billion a year in new government revenue. New government revenue is a polite way of saying new taxes. And $600 billion is a tad more than Trump's first-term tax cuts of $550 billion a year. April Fool's Day would have been a more appropriate launch date. MAGA apologists argue that most of the tariffs will be paid by companies that import into the United States. Maybe, but probably not. Companies that don't pass on their increased costs, including taxes, don't stay in business for long. And any consumer relief coming from tighter importer margins will almost certainly be smaller than the higher prices charged by domestic producers, because they can charge more if they face less competition. And that doesn't even begin to take into account the costs that will be passed on to consumers by retaliatory tariffs imposed by our trading partners. The stock market is a fairly good indicator of the sentiments of the owners of businesses. Back in February, most investors thought Trump tariff talk was on a par with his talk about taking back the Panama Canal or annexing Greenland, staking out an extreme initial position in order to negotiate the best deal. In other words, mostly bluster. Now the smart money is figuring out that Trump might really believe his own BS. The NASDAQ is down over 13%, and the pain may be just starting. Buy the dip at your own risk. Remember, kids, tariffs are taxes. Taxes are always and everywhere, always paid by people, not by corporations. Corporations just pass them along. Higher taxes plus irresponsibly borrowing magic money from the Fed inexorably leads to more government spending as a percentage of the total spending going on in the economy. Government spending goes to the military, health, education, environmental, welfare, industrial complex, which gives a cutback to the politicians who grease their gravy train. If Elon Musk's Doge has shown us anything, it's shown us that the government does not spend money productively. For years, Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform has been advocating lower taxes to starve the beast. Lower tariffs are a part of lower taxes. The other part is lower levels of magic money creation by the Fed, because inflation that results from government spending magic money is just another tax. Trump and his economic advisors are ignoring that. Maybe he'll get it right in his third term. That's this week's report from the fields. I'm Richard Fields. See you again next week.
The end consumer pays all costs. Something we have been pounding here since as long as I've been here, and probably for the last 30 years or so, however long we've been on. We've been in some frame or another, been telling people that the end consumer pays all costs, whether it's a tariff, a regulation, or a tax. It's you, the average wage earner, that ends up paying it.
I agreed, and Richard didn't talk about something historical, is that World War II, in many ways, was because of restraining trade. The U.S. Making it impossible for Japan to get oil and get steel and all the rest, because Japan is at the time and I think still very industrious, hardworking people with zero resources. Yet they built some pretty cool cars. So those resources have to come from somewhere, and we were basically choking them off through tariffs in many cases. And the same thing was happening in Europe and around the world. And you know, if you're intertwined in commerce with other countries, then you don't want to do anything to hurt that mutually beneficial arrangement. When we're doing this stuff, not only does it harm the flow of capital and goods and services and throw inefficiencies in, more inefficiencies than we already have, but it pisses people off and wars start. So it's pretty stupid, and I'm hoping it's just a negotiating tactic, and we'll see. You know, Trump in his first presidency wasn't smart enough to admit he made a mistake in doing what the science said to do about COVID, and we paid the price. So hopefully he'll get smart on this and backpedal. He's already backpedaling on some of it. And you know, maybe people will get together and do what they should have done 50 years ago, which is eliminate all tariffs. But if you're going to do that, what we have to do is stop subsidizing farmers in this country, and they have to stop subsidizing everybody in the EU.
Well, that is kind of the problem. You know, one of the things, the only comment I have on, you know, tariffs are bad. We all know this, but it seems to be in popular discourse, the tariffs that exist are fine, and the tariffs that people put on to retaliate Trump's tariffs are fine, but Trump's tariffs are bad.
No,
and they can't seem to wrap around their head that all this scheme is bad.
Well, if you look at the existing tariffs, and I know we need to move on to other things, but if you look at the existing tariffs in general, we charge about half what the rest of the world charges in tariffs for the flow of goods into this country versus flow of goods, our goods in other countries. And if you take all that amount of trade in, that's a big chunk of change. Yeah. And just evening that out, but you don't even it out by throwing a 50% tariff on stuff. That's just crazy, man.
And it's one thing if you're talking about some fourth world country that's barely making it and they're putting tariffs on us and you shrug your shoulders, you don't care, right? Because it's not really impacting you.
It's
but when you're talking
bad
about
for them.
But when you're talking about the EU and Mexico and these kind of places that are developed economies, you know, you're the
51st state.
It's a vastly different thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about bad economic decisions. California passed AB 1228 last year, and this is the $20 fast food minimum wage. And it's gone on to show all the things that those of us who are against this kind of every single thing that we sit there and said was going to happen has essentially happened, John. And not only that, now I saw an article just last week about how AI is now going to take your drive-through orders here in California. Because why wouldn't they? If it's going to cost you $20 an hour to pay someone who's barely productive, then why wouldn't you put in AI?
Well, I think they're actually very productive. They work very hard. I would not want to have their job. But if you weren't forced to pay them $20 an hour, what would you pay them? 12, 10, 15, whatever. And margins, people don't realize that margins in fast food are a little better than it is in a grocery store, but they're slim. They're slim. So any time you mess with something on the supply side or the regulatory side or the tax side, this is basically a tax, then it has horrible effects. And people need entry-level jobs. I mean, probably, I think it's something like over half the people in the country at one time, their first job was at McDonald's.
Yeah, you need to learn those first basic how to show up, how to get to work done, and how to do what you're told jobs.
How to wash your hands.
And if you can't do that at a fast food place, then where else can you do it?
In the factories. No, we don't have those either. Okay.
And so,
because we've regulated them out of existence.
My biggest problem with the moral outrage at these kind of things, not the outrage, the moral proselytizing that they do when they pass these kind of things is they don't actually care. It's a tax. You mentioned that this is just a tax. It is a tax. This is a tax on these people's labor because they do not reduce the tax rate that the employer has to pay. You know, the payroll tax rate stays the same. It's not like they adjust it so the employer doesn't have to pay any extra tax on the higher wage. The employer still has to pay the higher tax on the higher wage.
Right.
So it's a backhanded tax increase.
Yeah. Which is what they wanted all along.
Which is the real point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the real point. And you can do it well because it's like, going against smokers. It's okay. It's fast food. Of course you can attack fast food because no one's going to complain. Or, everybody's going to say.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm complaining. There's only one fast food chain that I eat at.
Which one is that?
That's where you go in and you go out, in and out.
No, it's just, hey.
Huh?
There it is, going right there.
Yeah, but
All right.
they were already paying people above prevailing wage.
Now,
And they're paying more than that now.
and that is the thing. If you're at 6 months after you got your job, you're still making minimum wage, you need to find a new job or you're a bad employee. Because it's either a bad employer or you're a bad employee, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the minimum wage isn't something you sit at. It's just not. Once you've proven yourself, you at least get a 25 cent,
Those
50
people
cent
hustle.
rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they hustle because they get rewarded for it.
Yes.
And not just cash rewards. They get rewarded by the culture. Apparently it's a good place to work. You get respected as a human being.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it here. Most people, when they go to work, they just want to get their jobs done.
Yeah.
They just want to be able to go in, get their job done, and go home. That's what most people want, and without a bunch of silliness.
Yeah.
And so, but silliness, John, is. Argentina's poverty levels have slidden, right? But the way they write the article is there's kind of, well, it hasn't slidden enough,
Yeah.
or it's a backhanded compliment is the
Yeah.
way these articles
Yeah.
are written. But the reality is the chainsaw worked in Argentina. They took a chainsaw, they essentially cut half of the government, just like that, and then they're still working on cutting it down. And it worked. It freed up. Not just
They reduced tariffs.
They reduced tariffs. They reduced their
Regulation.
the regulation on
bureaucracy.
housing. They reduced the zoning law. All those kind of everything that stifled economic progress, everything that stifled people's desire to improve their lives, has been removed. And the benefits of that are starting to show. The fact that it's starting to show 15 months later is what's amazing. It didn't take 3 years. It didn't take 4 years.
Well, it happened almost instantaneously in the monetary markets because their exchange rate improved, their credit worthiness improved, and there's a very good chance that in another year they're going to be investment grade. Their bonds are going to be investment grade. Right now they're junk because of all these things they're done. Maybe our government should pay attention to that.
Yeah. Maybe we should make sure we don't get to the point where the chainsaw works. I mean, we're dang close now.
Well,
if
we're
we're
already.
not there.
You can't tell me we don't need to do the same thing here. I mean, everybody was saying, oh no, you probably won't. Your taxes will be. My tax return arrived more quickly yesterday than it ever has since I've started filing taxes, and they've already whacked a bunch of IRS people.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you're assuming that this is one of the assumptions. It's like government, right? They assume, well, we spent this much money, but you didn't accomplish anything. And just because you're firing 14,000, 10,000, 20,000 workers doesn't mean that the people who are left are going to still be able to get the job done when so many people haven't been getting the job done.
one of the clowns I talked to, I'll be quick, quick for John.
Yeah.
I'll be quick, even quick. One of the clowns I talked to at the coffee house thinks he's a very educated man. He was talking about the Trump firing all these anti-corruption people, and who's gonna handle the corruption now? Because everybody knows the Republicans are going to corrupt. And I said, let me posit a different thought. How many people were they arresting, trying, and conviction and convicting for corruption at the federal level before he fired those people? And the answer was none. So they haven't been doing anything, and we know all this corruption is going on. So if they haven't been doing their job, fire them and put somebody in that will.
And we know from the top of the show that really most of these people are just literally shuffling papers around.
Yes.
They're just moving papers around, signing it, putting it back, making you fill out papers again, sending it back to you. We know that that's what most of these people are doing. That's kind of the system they have delivery set up. I'm going to skip to the end of the page. We got like 2 minutes. So we're going to go down to Los Angeles has decided to take control of their homeless agency, citing the audits that found reckless spending. And which
unaudited spending, cash payments without any. Oh, sounds like the Treasury.
It sounds like the rest of the Los Angeles city government.
Yeah.
They set up an agency that they don't have any controls on, and then now they're going to say, oh, well, we don't know what happened, so now we're going to take control and start to do better. These people are so full of themselves. Does anybody actually believe this nonsense, is my question, I suppose, John.
Well, and their goal is not to do better. Their goal is to generate, it's like in India where they intentionally blind people and put them on the street corner so they can get alms. What they do in California is intentionally have homeless people so they can get taxes and spend them. They don't care about homeless people. They don't care one iota. If they did, there's some pretty easy fixes. Lower the cost of housing, 1. Give them all the free drugs they want, 2. Problem solved.
Yeah. Well, we saw it right here down the street from my house a couple of years ago. Is they closed all the low-end motels. There used to be a handful of low-end motels on Stockton Boulevard, and that's where those, the people who were teetering on the edge, that's where they lived.
Yeah.
That was their housing. When the city and county decided to close all those,
Flop houses, boarding houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of a magical thing. Next thing we know, we have a bunch of tents and people sleeping on the sidewalks and sleeping in their cars, and they're going, yeah, no kidding. They didn't want the services. They said, well, we'll offer them services, homeless services. But they weren't homeless until you made them homeless. They at least had a place to stay. They had a roof over their head.
If they have a place to stay, then you can't set up a whole big bureaucracy that will give kickbacks to your political campaign. If they got a place to stay, there's no problem to solve. They have to create a problem so they can pretend to solve it.
And this is how you spend billions upon billions of dollars and have the problem be worse.
$32 billion so far in California.
Yeah,
for
what is it?
homelessness.
And they don't know how it's spent.
And it's worse now than it's. And just a correlation, there's 1/5 the number of homeless per 100,000 in Texas as there is in California, and price of housing in Texas is 1/3 of what it is here. No correlation and causation, right there.
Yeah, it's kind of both.
Yeah.
In California, we do everything kind of the wrong way.
Yeah.
And then we double down by spending ourselves into oblivion, spending our taxpayers.
But we'll be able to get there quickly on high-speed rail.
Oh, God. John, you're going to get us started on high-speed rail here at the end of the show. We've got like 30 seconds left, John. So, I'm going to say, at some point, us Californians are going to have to accept our responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And
we voters.
Voters, all of us, not just voters, taxpayers, all of us are going to have to accept responsibility for what we've created. And with that, we are out of time. Thank you for being here, John.
Thank you
everybody inside there for working so hard. I want to thank you for watching. Have a good night, and please remember to love everybody.
Especially those that you don't think deserve it. Love them until they love themselves.
Kill them with kindness.
Well, no, don't kill them, but yeah. No.
Hey, you can't kill anybody with kindness, John.